We recognized 6 years ago now, when we started putting together the first version of the proposal, that there was a gap in this area, that the circular economy discourse was gaining momentum. However, there was no professional profile equipped with the right skills, the right knowledge in order to drive the transition. So the idea was essentially to combine skills, knowledge from different sectors, from different disciplines, in order to put together a set of professionals who could then go either to academia, to public sector, or in the private sector, and disseminate this knowledge, these skills to aid the transition. So it has been a truly interdisciplinary project. We have had a work package concerned with supply chains, recognizing that supply chains play a pivotal role in the transition towards a circular economy. One work package more concerned with methods such as life cycle assessment, energy accounting, in order to develop the evaluation of production systems, of transition trajectories based on rigorous approaches. And then two work packages concerned with macroeconomic issues and regional development teams, in order to try to bridge the gap between the circular economy discourse and some literature strands which have rarely engaged with circular economy. We can say that the project has been a success under many points of view. We have published over 50 academic papers as a consortium. We have run a number of conferences ourselves. We have participated in many conferences. There has been a production of reports, deliverables, if we stick to the academic indicators, which has been really phenomenal. In addition to this, as a network, we have also tried to encourage knowledge transfer with industry and with policymakers. We have had a very rich program of secondments with our ESRs undertaking long stays at industrial partners, at non-academic partners in general, and this has been very valuable for their experience going beyond what a normal PhD can offer. Also, we have had quite a lot of mobility within the network, our ESRs visiting partners within the network for long stays. And all this has happened in very challenging circumstances. I remember when we had our first winter school in Naples, 2019, December 2019, we didn't know that this was going to be the dawn of a new world, unfortunately a worse world than the one we have experienced. We've had pandemics, wars, you name the kind of problems that this network has been going through. So for this reason, I mean, we need to be immensely proud of the achievements of this network and essentially celebrating our success. The aim of today's event is also trying to discuss what we have achieved as a network, the scientific results we have achieved with people who have been active in the policy arena. And for this reason, we have a very valuable panel of experts with us today. Emanuele Di Francesco, Luca Polidori, who is here with us in the room, and Patrick Schröder, who will be having a dialogue with us today on the policy briefs that this project has produced. These are still at the draft level, and we will be using this occasion today as a sort of co-production event with our experts to refine these briefs and to make them even more relevant for the translation of our findings into a language which can be relevant and digestible by policymakers, by decision makers who are called to reflect upon the implementation of circular economy practices. Of course, I mean, throughout this journey, during these last 4.5 years, we have discovered that, while the idea of a circular economy might be appealing, might be something that we can use as a sort of polar star to guide our actions towards a more sustainable future. Well, this translation of these theoretical concepts in practice, it's not free from flaws, traps. It can become the epitome, the pinnacle of greenwashing, as we have had the occasion of identifying in many of our research activities. And in order to avoid these risks, in order to mitigate these risks, it's important to translate our research findings into something that can be communicated to policymakers. So this is the objective of the morning, where we will have this session where our ESRs and experts from the consortium will be having a dialogue with Luca, Emanuele, and Patrick. And then the afternoon will be mainly devoted to the follow-up discussion. So how do we make sure that this fantastic network that we have put together in the last 5 years will continue to operate? What can come next? What further projects we can work upon? What new partnerships we can forge in order to continue to leverage on the great research that we have produced, and to make sure that there will be a follow-up for the near future. Also, to make sure that we don't discard these huge assets that we have created, this network of very talented people, mainly our ESRs, who will be now ready to go to industry, to academia, to the third sector, and spread their knowledge. So without wasting further times with my pontificating attitude, let's start with the first presentation for today. So we can go to work package 1, which is the one related to the circular supply chains and the role that supply chains can play in the transition towards the circular economy. So I would call the representatives from work package 1 here to give an account of their presentation. So Tommaso, I think you're starting with the first policy brief that we can share, and this will happen in a second. So let's share our screen, and you can give a brief account of the steps we need to take in order to make sure that transition towards circular supply chains happens in the right way. Over to you, Thomas.
Yes. Hi, everyone. So in work package 1, throughout this last year, we have explored many supply chain aspects that have to do with the transition towards the circular economy, because of course transitioning towards circular supply chain requires a concerted effort from all the actors in the supply chain to improve the use we make of resources, to extend the lifespan of products. And the research, especially at the beginning of this project, at that time, wasn't really considering very deeply the supply chain implications. So what we looked at was looking at how supply chain relationships are in circular supply chain, what are the critical risks and challenges in supply chain, and how also you can build mathematical models to describe all these problems. So that based on the research we conducted, these are the main recommendations that we want to suggest. First of all, companies that want to approach the circular economy need to re-examine the extent they are integrated with key suppliers and customers. Not only this, but collaboration should be also made outside the boundaries of the supply chain, such as with governmental institution, non-governmental organization, which could also help them to acquire the skills and the knowledge that are needed to transition towards the circular economy. Secondly, looking specifically at the level of integration with suppliers and customers, so the extent the companies are sharing information, they're developing collaborative approaches. Companies need also to recognize that this is a factor that can help the adoption of most incremental approaches towards the circular economy. So practices that have to do with resource efficiency, recycling, but at the same time, it is important to recognize that being too much integrated in a linear system, in a linear supply chain, could also constitute a challenge to adopt more radical approaches toward the circular economy. Third point, and this is something Felipe will discuss further later, in order to identify and manage risks and uncertainty in circular supply chains, managers need to adopt a balanced, proactive, and reactive approach. And the last point is very much focused on the policies required to facilitate the evolution of linear supply chain towards circular supply chain, and it is to promote sustainable practices in the industrial sector. Policies can be developed to encourage companies to invest in markets for remanufactured and refurbished products. So to conclude, so developing circular supply chain is a vital step towards achieving a circular economy. Supply chains are considered a key unit of action where these circular economy principles can take place and survive. So with this work in these years, we tried to shed some light on some of these aspects, and we're looking forward to discuss also with the panel, and also my colleagues are ready to answer to specific doubts and questions.
Okay, thank you, Tommaso, for this first introduction to the work that has been done. I don't know if there is any feedback from Luca or from Emanuele and Patrick, who are attending online. Luca, maybe you want to go first.
Yes, shall I stand up?
No, I think, okay. Everybody can hear you. So.
Okay, lovely. So now, first of all, maybe very quickly I will present myself. I am Luca Polidori. I work for a secretary and program manager for the Circular Hubs at Holland Circular Hotspot, which is the organization that is taking care of the internationalization side of the Dutch strategy to become fully circular by 2030. And I am also board member of Delta, which is a research center on circular economy policies, sectorial approach based here in Brussels. Finally, I'm in the governing board of CIRPAS, one of the 30 people in the governing board of CIRPAS, which is the flagship European project on the digital passport, defining what will come soon. Now, thank you for the presentation of the work package one. I think it's very interesting, the area we have explored. I do think that this is quite connected with what we have seen recently happening at European level with the new sustainability reporting standards that will become mandatory first now for a very limited amount of companies, but by 2026 it will include both large and small and medium enterprises, and then by 2028 also the non-European companies that want to make business with Europe. And the reason I say that is because in that the circular economy taxonomy is still in draft. We can expect a release very soon, but I do consider this to be more or less final. Clearly see is that all the companies will need to report back at a value chain level, not only at on their own, not only on what is the impact of their own organization, but on a supply chain analysis, and of course starting now to understand the importance of selecting the partners as well as the risks that are included in that, will put proactive organizations in a way. It will bring them to be more competitive when it will arrive from the top down, because it will arrive top down. It will be probably a bit late if we start all in 2026. So I think the job you've done now is a great job, and I think it should be listened by the regions, bottom up, and tried to be implemented.
I think you mentioned some Emanuele here because Luca, because we specifically with Tommaso we have run his main work, the work that forms the backbone of his PhD, precisely on the reporting of circular economy initiatives in corporate sustainability reports. And what we found, of course, this was pre the approval of the taxonomy, was a very big degree of variation. The fact that companies were often reporting very tokenistic actions, and the fact that there was definitely a lack of supply chain perspective. So clearly, what you were mentioning is a step in the right direction, and probably we will need to reassess these in the future to see if this policy intervention, these institutional pressures, to use a language we have become familiar with, will be effective. Emanuele, Patrick, any comment from your side? Emanuele, would you like to go first if you have any point?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andrea. Do you hear me well?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. I mean, first of all, just very briefly, congratulations to everyone for the project. I mean, Andrea made a fantastic pitch before, so not much to add, but also from an external point of view, it's really interesting and excellent and very relevant material. So I think the outputs that you produce now compared to where you started 6 years ago, I think it's a clear manifestation of how relevant your work has been. So congratulations to everyone involved. Now, coming to this specific one, thanks, Tommaso, for the presentation. A couple of points. I mean, the first one, I think there is not more relevant period than this one, right? With the old supply chain disruptions we have been assisting to in the last years, even before the war, but starting with the Suez Canal, and how much a block in maritime traffic can represent a challenge to having our linear supply chains working. So that's clearly a very relevant period. I think this topic at its core is all about not only changing and finding new partners, but also thinking about a new value creation model, right? So it's really about how you create value and what value you want to create. So even in terms of you want to create value as a product or as a service, that's a massive change. It starts even before the partners that then you select for your commercial partners. So that's, I think, something that goes at the core, and it's really about the mindset as well at its core. Regarding the brief, more specifically, I found it very interesting, this discussion, which is very intricate, I think, between incremental versus radical changes, what's most conducive to true and long-lasting change. I think that's a very intricate discussion, because the lock-in risk, and especially kind of masquerading incremental improvements on a linear chain as circular transformation, that's quite a concrete risk. So I think that's an important component to avoid. On the other end, starting where we're starting, how do we make the radical changes if we don't do the first steps that may show people, especially executives in companies, for instance, and also policymakers, what the change could bring in terms of benefits. So that's, I think, really, it goes to the core of the discussion. It's a very intricate point that could be developed further. I don't think there are many final solutions there, and probably examples also would help in understanding the differences. And one final point about remanufacturing, which I think it's, again, a core topic in the discussion, has to do with value creation mindset, of course, and it has to do, as you mentioned, with policy enabling remanufacturing, also through investments, but also on the supply chain side. That's the clear cases where the design of the product or the technology in the first place is then the best indicator for what will be the success of the remanufacturing efforts, whether it's going to be profitable, it's going to be able to save resources. So that's, I think, a key sector still unexplored to a large extent. We're still not seeing enough of that, but I think it's very important to focus on remanufacturing, both from a policy perspective, but also collaboration in the supply chain, and how a producer and a remanufacturer, whether they're not the same actor, can help each other in actually taking the highest utility, the highest value out of this. So again, very interesting, I think, core topics that you've been touching upon in this brief.
Thank you, Emanuele. Patrick, anything to add? So Patrick Schröder from Chatham House, which is a renowned think tank worldwide.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to join today. This is great. Also, from my side, congratulations to everyone for completing this project, and the outputs that you mentioned sound very impressive. I'll have to look at some of the publications that come out of this. I think it's really relevant to also, yeah. I think the contribution to the knowledge base for the circular economy transition is quite important. Just a couple of thoughts on the policy brief. So one, I mean, some of the questions when it comes to supply chains nowadays is a lot of discussion, local versus global. So these big questions, I think, not so clear. Are local supply chains more resilient than global ones? Are the risks of local supply chains smaller than the global ones? How does that? I mean, there's the trends of nearshoring, friendshoring. How does that link to the circular economy and to circular value chains, circular supply chains? So I think for policymakers, if you can mention these, if you can link it to these discussions, I think that would be quite relevant, especially when also when it comes to the risks. The question, I mean, there are some, as I saw also in this other brief. So we know there are risks to the linear supply chains, and they have been disrupted through pandemic and also the war in Ukraine. And how far are the circular supply chains less risky, and in which aspect? Or is it just shifting risks from one type of risk to another? The other aspect that I'd be interested if you can also tell a bit more about, does that differentiate for specific sectors? I think in the brief at the moment you you generally mention the industrial sector, but obviously there's many different industries within that. Are there different risks for different areas and supply chains? That's one aspect. And then I think it might be helpful if you make a bit clearer in the recommendations part, which are the recommendations for example, the private sector or supply chain managers within companies, and which ones are recommendations for policy. And then in terms of the policy, I mean, the recommendation is very important. How to create markets for local, or how to invest in markets for remanufacturing and refurbished products. But which are the specific policies that can help with that? Is that various types of taxation or economic incentives, or for example, the right to repair legislation that's often that's coming up now, or is it related to trade policy? So some more detail on which policy interventions can facilitate this. I think that'd be really useful to know.
Thank you, Patrick. Excellent points, and we'll definitely take these into account in producing final version of the briefs. Everything has been duly noted, and yeah, I mean, the first thing you mentioned about the link between friendshoring, nearshoring, and circular economy, it's something that really needs to be explored. We are also thinking about essentially writing a new proposal about this, because definitely this is something that deserves further investigation. Is there a link between nearshoring initiatives and circular economy implementation? Does one drive the other? Is there a mutual dependency among the two, or are the two things completely unrelated and things happen in a very serendipitous way? So definitely this is something we will investigate. Thank you. And let's focus now even more on risk. So I will call Felipe here to mention some more key aspects related to the risks which are inherent in circular supply chains. Over to you, Felipe, and let me just share the screen here so that people can have a look at the brief while you go.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. For this part of the work package one, I would like to focus on the ability of circular supply chains to, for example, reduce waste and maximize material recovery, thereby improving the sustainability performance of production and consumption systems. But as Andrea and Tommaso already pointed out, the transition to circular supply chains is not a straightforward process. In this path, there is very likely that managers or practitioners will find challenges hampering their transition. So therefore, when you first identify those risks, it's also optimal to measure them in order to improve their sustainability performance. Based on our research on the ReTraCE project, I can mention certain risks that were quite common, such as, for example, the financial instability that managers will find when they are implementing circular economy thinking. Here, by circular thinking, I can say reduce, reuse, recycle, remanufacture. All these are imperative strategies. But when companies try to implement this, they might face financial risks, especially in the absence of financial investment, such as from the government. So here we can already see that as a strategy, the government has to support this transition somehow. Apart from that, we can also see operational and technological issues. When you want to operationalize all our imperatives, we will need skilled workforce, machines, technologies that will help out with the circular supply chains. Or when you implement such new technologies, your employees might not be aware of how to operationalize these in their daily activities. I just recommend the reading of our systematic literature review, because there, I think it was a question from the audience, where can we specifically locate all those risks and uncertainties? So in this paper, we organize them according to 3 levels: at the firm, at the supply chain, and external levels. So you have a comprehensive overview of those issues. But as a recommendation, based on this research, I would say we should, practitioners should adopt a being ready, prepared, and proactive approach. That means that we should be proactive to identify potential issues that are upcoming. Just go for it, try to identify all those challenges, but also be prepared, because once you are in the transition process, things will happen. You will identify bottlenecks, for example, with the technologies or all the processes related to it. And also being ready to combine such approaches, to be proactive and also to be reactive to all those risks and uncertainties. Moreover, we have found out that establishing partnerships beyond the traditional customer and supplier basis can also bring additional knowledge and synergies in these circular supply chains. So for example, I already mentioned that the government has a key role in supporting companies, especially those that are undercapitalized or do not understand legislation or the institutional frameworks that are coming up all the time. So they also have a role in this transition. And also at the internal level, they should be able to develop, implement, and also constantly revise those policies and procedures related to circular economy implementation. I can mention, for example, the introduction of new procedures regarding product design. So if you really want to make your products or services more circular, you should be very aligned with those market demands, of course, to adopt more, for example, recycled content in your products. But more importantly, you should also be able to tell your customers, in this specific case, that your packaging, your products can be, for example, repaired, refurbished, and not just recycling. From my side, I think those would be the main recommendations when we talk about risk and uncertainty management.
Okay, thank you, Felipe, for this further details on risk management in circular supply chains. I think this aligns quite well also to what we have been discussing earlier. I'm not sure if there are additional points that we want to mention. Luca?
Yeah, only maybe one point is that, of course, the situation changes a lot when you go to big companies and when you go to small and medium enterprises. And I see, and I think we should, of course, the different recommendations should be adapted to the context. Because, for example, in another recommendation, in brief, we'll see later about hubs. And I do think that small and medium enterprises need the support of something in the middle, helping them to be proactive, helping them to make the right links. While, of course, bigger companies can mitigate these risks with being a player themselves. So probably there is more space to investigate how they can be mitigated based on the size and the structure of the companies themselves. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I completely agree with the risks that are identified. I think that companies in the Netherlands are having exactly the same issues, even if we are considered to be front running of this kind of these things.
Thank you so much for your comment.
Patrick, any addition from your side?
Yeah, I was also going to mention the different company size. I think that's because there are different risks, including also startup companies versus established companies. I mean, some of the discussions that we had with both, but I mean, the risk the larger companies face is they have a business model that works on a linear model. And so they're very hesitant to make changes to that because because of the uncertainty how a more circular model would work. So it's often the circular strategies of large companies with complex supply chains is tweaking it a little bit, but not if they're not built around circular principles from the start, and obviously most companies aren't. I mean, the other aspect I think that's important also, and you mentioned this, is there needs to be financial support from the public sector to the private sector to make this transition happen. However, that's the question is also may some more detail on this would also be helpful, because currently public budgets are totally overstretched on many fronts. So what are the right mechanisms to enable to provide this financial support? Is it direct subsidies to circular businesses? And for some, I mean, in some ways we might see that now with the recent EU policies on the Net Zero Industries Act, or also the Critical Raw Materials Act, which are in a way then responses to the United States IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. So subsidies are becoming more popular now, but or are there other ways? I mean, one of the things that we've talked about in our publications, and there's a lot, it's often mentioned, is blended finance mechanisms, where both public and private finance come together to provide this type of risk-sharing mechanism. So that could be a way forward. Yeah, no, some more detail on this might be good for the brief.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick, and again, thank you also for linking to the point that we were mentioning earlier of this risk of a linear lock-in. When you have a business model that works, that is linear, you have a very well integrated supply chain, great collaborations with your partners, your suppliers, with your customers, but in a linear fashion. This also probably increases the perception of the risks related to the transition, and this is something that also Tommaso has documented quite well in his research, and it's probably something that is worth investigating even more and putting it in spotlight in the brief, along with the financing mechanisms. Absolutely. Emanuele, something else to add from your side?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Felipe, for another excellent brief and presentation. Yeah, just a couple of points, maybe following up also on what was mentioned before. The first one is about on the risk side. Of course, it might be out of scope for your current work, but an important component in the transition from linear to circular is certainly what is the impact on previous partners that were at the core of linear supply chains. And this can be both, I think, on a, let's say, global north perspective, but due to the economies that we built and relied upon for decades, it's also more important in global north-south perspective. That's something that at the World Resources Forum we have been working on quite a lot, and Patrick also has been extensively researching, so it's probably more in a position to further elaborate. But I think it's important to analyze, especially for suppliers very up the supply chain, so the raw materials providers and those extracting and supplying raw materials, usually in continents as Africa or Latin America. What is the impact of shifting to circular supply chains towards those partners that basically have been investing and increasing the extraction rate due to demand coming from the global north? And now that we change our supply and we go towards the direction of sufficiency, of self-sufficiency, what's the impact on that? Of course, it's not clear when and whether we would achieve self-sufficiency in Europe, as an example, but I think it's an important discussion because it's also a matter of fairness at its core. And the second point, I think it's about, which I find very interesting, is about one of the challenges that you identify is the limited quantity and quality of secondary flows or resources, secondary resources. And also linking it to what Patrick mentioned, so the Critical Raw Materials Act, I think that's particularly important for certain resources, like critical raw materials, because we are talking about, on one side, there is the mining opportunity, clearly, and something that willy-nilly we will need to be increased over years with all the environmental and social impact that it comes with. But if we want to limit mining as much as possible, then of course the availability of secondary resources for minerals and metals becomes really important. And I think there we are still quite behind, both on research but also on capacity, technical capacity to recover those minerals and metals from technology products, for instance. So that's, I think, a particularly important aspect to focus on, how we can increase the availability in quality and quantity of secondary raw materials, focusing on, for instance, the critical raw materials category.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. Great points. I don't know, Felipe, if you have anything to add, any response? We have probably a couple of minutes.
Just 1 minute then for finalizing this. I can already bring as an insight you mentioned about locked in and also the availability of secondary resources. We were also we obtained quite some interesting results when we talked about this resistance to change in our Delphi study. I see some of you participated. Also, thank you for the discussion. And we found out that when you have this difference of prices for virgin and secondary raw materials, this can also boost the companies paying more attention to cheap raw materials rather than looking for raw material alternatives. And the other point for the locked-in mentality is in the transition towards the circular economy. I totally agree that big companies will, well, we have our established practice, so why do we have to change to new ones? And we say we observe that this resistance to change is also at very high levels in big companies. And thank you for also taking notes, and we can definitely look forward for this.
Yeah, just a very small point on this last thing, because I do have the feeling often from my experience that many big companies stress their lock-in to get R&D funding.
Yeah.
I do think that big companies should be pressed by policies. And for example, we were speaking before about the sustainability new reporting standards, which will have a role. But I do think that these lock-ins for big companies should be from a policy perspective, from a policy framework.
It should be challenged.
It should be challenged from a policy perspective. And if you look now at, for example, how European money is spent, most of the Horizon budget goes to pilot reactions on big companies, and there is a mismatch there to be addressed somewhere.
Yeah, there is of the European champions, that it's quite apparent in the way EU funding is designed. That probably goes exactly against this mechanism that you were suggesting, challenging the big businesses who control big supply chains or responsible for a very relevant quota of the GDP generation, and forcing them in some way to become more circular. Clearly, this is not a very good point. Yeah, very good point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Felipe. We move now to work package 2 with our great colleague, Professor Sergio Uggiati, will present a work which has been resulting from the work package 2 of the ReTraCE project. Sergio is presenting here just because most of the ESRs, well, we have Amos here, who was an ESR at the University Partenopei of Naples, that Mariana and Kevin were also involved, will be having their Viva, their final PhD Viva in a couple of days. So they are preparing for this very important event. They are online with us today. But we thought it was a good idea to give the stage to Sergio, who's been coordinating this work, which has been performed by Mariana, Amos, Jay, who is here, and Kevin Van Langen, and also for first 2 years by Ignacia Miguel, who was based at Chatham, who was one of the industrial partners of the ReTraCE control. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Of course, presenting the work package 2 results is more easy because this work package has benefited from the work of all the other work packages because it's about methods, and all the other work packages had to apply methods, and so it was easy, and it was very important to go and see how they did. So thank you everybody for this. Let's do this easy. Circular economy is a framework that applies to a complex system, which is life economy of all our societies embodied in the environment, so in the biosphere. So we have to be aware of this complexity, and we have to be aware that it is really very hard to minimize production and conversion costs, to increase awareness in stakeholders, and sorry, I forgot to.
Nice ringtone.
And so I think that this figure clarifies very well the multidimensionality of the methods that everybody had to apply. We had to take care of the environmental, economic, and social dimensions. We had to take care of many different methods. There is not one method fit all. Forget it. And also, just putting the methods together one after the other in a linear way is not the way. And also the scales, we have micro, meso, and macro scales, but all the scales interact. So the real important thing is the quality of all the methods that we apply, the quality of the results, and the relations. It's important that stakeholders, policymakers, business are together, and they are able to interact, and all the methods interact, and all the dimensions are taken care all together. So this is really hard, but this is the basis for circular economy to be successful. So the comprehensive perspective of a system as a whole is important, but also the different steps, hotspots, and feedbacks are also important in order to be really aware that what we are doing is something new in the global economy of the country or the planet and in the biosphere. So never forget this, otherwise we certainly fail. And so we need to expand our perspective to look at resources, processes from the take, make, dispose to design, understand, process and use, recover, regenerate in a life cycle perspective. And actually this requires many different expertise. It requires that policymakers and managers and stakeholders also take care of this hard stuff. I'm very happy that the two presentations before pointed out the need to be proactive. Being proactive means don't wait governments do the job for you. Don't forget it. Governments help. Governments will do something, but we, the managers and also the researchers and also the stakeholders must do our share of the job. And then therefore, and finally the need, then after understanding complexity, after understanding the quality of the relations, the importance of the relations, we have to design a roadmap that allows our interaction, that allows to understand where are we going and what are we doing. Otherwise, we meet, we make a meeting, we fight, and we don't know where each one is going. And so here is a kind of the roadmap we try to propose. And so the first step is the vision. We must be visionaries. We must be people who look far, who look to the goal and in the context of our situation, of what we're doing, who look at the methods that we have attained. And so the vision and the final step of our roadmap is the well-being. Of course, it must be clear that of course the final step for an individual stakeholder could also be more business, could also be a product, a better product, but at the very end, the final step is well-being. That's the goal, and we have to be aware of this. We have to spread this idea. And of course, two strong points in this roadmap are science. What we do must be science-based. It cannot be just talking of, yeah, I have an idea, perhaps. We must rely on science, and we must involve participation, engage all the stakeholders, all the beneficiaries, all the individual people, and at all levels. I spoke before about the different scales, and all the scales must interact. So we must have participation from all the scale, people and business and sectors of the economy. And we must also be able to change our direction if we realize that we are making some mistake. We must give a huge importance to milestones. Stop and think, where are we going, in order to start again, change the beginning, start the situation at the beginning, and as in the life cycle assessment we used to do. And we must reinforce the community in empowering the people if we realize that participation is providing benefits. And therefore, what is really important is that this roadmap that can be improved, can be enriched, of course, is the way to sit at the table and start changing the way we do politics, the way we do economy, the way we do environmental protection. Otherwise, we will arrive to a situation in which, to make environmental protection, I don't want to have any economy, I don't want to have any benefit, I reject everything. This is impossible. But I cannot even say that economy is important and environment can be forgotten. So this is what we propose. We propose it to all the work packages, what we generated thanks to the other work packages, and we believe that this is something that can be used by everybody in the different levels. I would like to conclude just showing some references, but I would like to say that for the first time in my life, I had to realize that, okay, my idea that the most important outcomes of a project are papers, the papers that we write so that we share our ideas with the other. In this project, I realized that the deliverables are very important. This project had wonderful deliverables in each work package, and of course, I hope that you will judge good deliverables also in the work package too. And these deliverables are a huge density of concepts and helpful ideas and results. So I really believe that it's important for all of us to go and read carefully all the deliverables. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio, and thank you also for understanding and stressing, the importance of project deliverables, which sometimes are just seen, as a sort of impediments towards more important things. Sometimes this is the attitude that we tend to have. Okay, there is a deliverable to complete, but I need to write a paper, which is more important. In this project, we have had a very good success also in translating deliverables into academic outputs and into content which was relevant for the policymaker. I think, the most important contribution of this work package has been the fact that we have highlighted that we need a multi-method approach for the evaluation of the transition towards a circular economy. There are a lot of useful methods, LCA, energy accounting. We can combine them in multi-criteria decision-making frameworks. We use them also to reconceptualize value, something that, for instance, Emanuele earlier was mentioning, in a way that can also try to overcome that problem of value monism, which was highlighted by Juan Martinez-Allier in 1988 in one of the fundamental papers which laid the foundation for ecological economics as a field. The challenge is how to let policymakers and politicians understand that there is this wealth of methods on which we can rely, which goes far beyond simple cost-benefit analysis, which goes far beyond very simplistic reductionistic applications of life cycle assessment, which, as we have been talking about in the reports, can also be misleading if they're not informed by prior assessment, prior multi-stakeholder assessment of the situation. I don't know, Luca, again, starting with you, any point you want to make on this work, which is again more methods based, but still we think it's very relevant for policy making.
I liked a lot the first diagram with the different methods because what I didn't see, let's say, was I don't see a screen.
Oh, sorry, but the screen has gone. Let's see if we manage to bring it up. Sorry, technical problems here at our end. We try plugging these in. No signal.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I think you were referring.
Yes. No, I like this one because in my job I've worked a lot on digitalization of some of these methods. But if you put this image horizontally, it looks pretty much like a neural network. Which can be of inspiration for some kind of forward going into the methods that are now being developed. I do also think that when it comes to maybe if you can go to the other image, when it comes to have science, where I agree with all the methods, and I would add indeed IT and digitalization to that. When it comes to that, of course, IT can also be a solution for the trust and transparency between the science and the participation, because we know that more data will be required, therefore more data systems also linked to a digital passport and all the data that will be required for Rethinking will be set up. So in the middle, I think that a bit about digitalization should come up.
Are you also talking about digitalization as a way to essentially shorten the distance between citizens and policymakers, so platforms?
Yes, I arrived there. Yes, it's just so big. I worked in the past on DigiCrime, which is a 20 million European project, and there Delta was a partner that was in charge of developing 3 different services, one of which was a barriers identification method. And when it comes to have a comprehensive analysis of the system itself, what is important to understand is that due to the end of life, for example, legislation, which doesn't make it possible to do certain translation of waste, you will end up with very limited information or about what is actually really happening in the ecosystem, because there are companies that are bypassing the law at the moment to be circular. There are companies that to be circular, they basically find ways around which are borderline of what is legal and what is illegal. And so, for example, making this analysis of the ecosystem also based on anonymous data helps when you make the multi-stakeholder analysis. Lastly, I want to touch on the fact you mentioned indeed we need to be proactive. We must companies, stakeholders must do their part. But I do believe that network governance is an alternative governance to public governance. But I do believe they should both collaborate, meaning that also from the public, the understanding that there should be more proactiveness going, but the society should be more proactive is something that must be understood, and the public authorities must understand today how to catalyze the proactiveness. So of course we cannot wait specific framework, we cannot wait for the government for the public action to be perfect to start being proactive, but the public side should also understand how to optimize the budget we have now in order to make possible that everything that the energy is of the stakeholders is going in the right direction, so that it will then combine again back with the public when there will be more clear legislation. And I think this part of the participation is crucial. Being proactive is not only and fully a 100% private responsibility. It's a public-private thing, like Patrick was mentioning before.
This also, in the brief from Work Package 4, where we will also look at models of participatory planning that we could adopt for the transition towards the circular economy. Thank you very much, Luca, for your points. Emanuele, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andrea. And again, thanks to Sergio for yet another excellent presentation. I think it was mentioned already, but this is really a vital work because it's that kind of work that can make the difference between a sort of reductionist, as you mentioned, but also greenwashed version of the circular economy, especially in relation to the benefits they might have, versus science-based assessment of what actually is the impact of the circular economy. And when we couple then different methods, and from the environmental and social side, and quantitative and qualitative, of course, we can get as close as possible to a picture which is based on data and on observations more than just on a slogan and ideology. So that's really a vital work. I think the biggest challenge here is really about how to communicate such complex methodologies, and especially the results of these complex methodologies, in a very simple and straightforward way to policymakers. So from my experience as well now working with the policy with the European Environment Agency, that what is really required is concise and clear outputs that are able to present complex information but in a very fruitable way. So that's a bit the challenge of not simplifying the information, but simplifying the way in which it is communicated. And that's really a clear and key challenge that needs to be faced. Otherwise, the information will not reach the decision makers, and then are in the position to actually decide about our joint future. So in this regard, I found the roadmap idea very interesting. Perhaps an additional idea could be also to work on a very concrete sort of fact sheet, where there are, for each decision to be taken, some elements to take into account. It can be something just one line per dimension, but to give an idea, okay, once I am thinking about in a certain context, then I should think about dimensions A, B, C, D, and E. Just to make sure that at least all the relevant considerations are in the picture. And finally, maybe a question is whether in your work that you've been doing now in developing this framework, you encountered some examples already at different scales, could be also at the city level or regional level or country level, where you've seen such framework coming into place. I know that Denmark has been working on a macroeconomic model, which is quite interesting, I think, really having this systemic dimension in there. But yeah, I was just curious whether you encountered some good cases of, let's say, policymakers going close to adopting such a complex framework in their decisions.
Yeah, Sergio, probably there is a question from Emanuele, which will
Thank you, Emanuele. I think that shortly, what excited me is an experience that happened in United Kingdom a couple of years ago in the medical sector. In the city named From, the hospital decided to ask to volunteers for help, to ask stakeholders for help in addressing several psychological diseases. And 200 groups of volunteers helped the people to walk the dog, to drink a tea at 5 o'clock, to do normal life things. And this allowed to decrease the use of drugs and medical supports by 25%, with a lot of savings in money terms, but in exciting results, scientific results in terms of curing the diseases. This is only one. I had many other experiences meeting people, but of course I do not list them here. I believe that organizing participation and some guidance from science helps a lot.
Thank you, Sergio. Patrick, any additional point on this more methodological note?
No, additional points. No, I was very glad to see the roadmap approach mentioned, especially because this is something we're very interested in on the international level. So some work that we've done scanning internationally what governments or generally countries are doing, and there are about 50 national roadmaps that have either been already undertaken as a process or are in preparation. And what we've proposed, so no, one thing that we've found out that once there are these roadmaps in place, there's nothing on the international level how this connects. So often the ministries that have undertaken those roadmaps are then in a way looking for the next steps in terms of also coordination with other countries, with other governments, because obviously then through the roadmap there's realization, through trade and value chains we are so closely connected, the transition cannot be done on our own, so we need to have this international cooperation. But so far on the international level, there's nothing how to connect this. That's why in Stockholm Plus 50 last year, we proposed the global roadmap process for an inclusive circular economy that would also address the issues around global inequality in north-south dimensions. It also address the aspect of having a common vision, which I also saw comes right at the start in the diagram, which I very much like, and then obviously also this participation aspect is key to enable also just transition. But because one thing that we've also noticed is that governments and countries are now pursuing circular economy strategies as a competitive advantage. So and then the problem is if that's pursued as a zero-sum game, so we become circular at the expense of other countries, that's problematic, not only in terms of kind of global inequality, global justice, because obviously it means the industrialized countries have an advantage in this to capture the higher value economic activities. But it's also problematic in terms of using the circular economy to protect global commons. So if the overall objective is to reduce pressure on ecosystems, and well, for climate and other issues around biodiversity, so that requires a slightly different approach, not slightly, quite a very different approach, I think, where we need to foster international cooperation rather than economic competition. So that's again where this international roadmap process would be very useful, or even essential. Happy to share some more information. Would be great also if people are interested. Happy also to enable participation. We're trying to do more on this this year. Also looking forward towards the United Nations SDG Summit, which takes place in New York later this year.
Thank you, Patrick. And yeah, I think you mentioned the key issue here, which was also mentioned at the beginning by Sergio. I mean, how do we define the unit of analysis for assessing circular economy initiatives? Because it's clear, that if we define this at a very local level, we get some results. But if we want circular economy to solve problems at a global level, things will change dramatically in terms of our assessment results. And this is often an aspect that is neglected when we adopt these environmental assessment methods. If, for instance, we bring back some remanufacturing activities in our local community, this might even cause an increase in CO2 emissions if we are replacing essentially products we were buying from abroad with some remanufacturing activities locally, and we might have more CO2 emissions locally. However, if we take a global perspective, we can see the benefit. And this leads us to the big question that Patrick was asking: can we have a circular economy in one and only one country? Probably the response is not. And we need assessment methods and roadmaps which capture very clearly this issue. So yeah, thank you very much to all of you for the remarks, and to Sergio for presenting this. All the points have been duly noted, and thank you very much, Patrick, for the links to the initiative, which we will try to capture as well in the revised briefs. Let's now move to the third work package. So we have here Giuseppe will be giving a short presentation of this policy brief, which is in a way a very critical piece of work, where we tried to analyze the compatibility of circular economy with the idea of economic growth. In the literature, at least the mainstream circular economy literature, the two things seem to be able to go hand in hand. But Giuseppe's reflection will probably give us a more critical perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrea. So I'm talking on behalf of Work Package 3, because we are Work Package 3, have 3 points of motivation and 3 recommendations. The first part, and I think it is a kind of common ground that we can agree, the mainstream conceptualization of the circular economy, it's an idea that depicts a transition to a circular economy based on voluntarism, and it frames a circular economy rather as a technical matter. This transition, the way we are doing it now in mainstream, and especially looking at the European context, relies on creating a coefficient tech, on inducing marginal modifications on behavior. And the most important thing is that it doesn't really question the market-based economy, which we find it I mean, we don't talk about eco-efficient technology or of course, technical developments as a bad thing per se. They are not bad, but they are not sufficient either. So we need to also we need to expand the problematization when we talk about the circular economy to include issues such as unfair relations in society, but also how there's a thing that perpetual expansion of the market economy that is rather needs to be challenged because we live in a finite world and we have reached its boundaries long ago. And until when? That's the question. So that's why we propose to first engage and take advantage of literature streams that you must be familiar of, such as political ecology, eco-socialism studies, post-growth studies, to formulate new circular economy policies that are actually capable to deliver not only sustainability, first sustainability, this is an urgent matter, but also social justice, which we pretty much need. This is the motivation. Recommendations, thanks. So, 3 advices, as I say. First, acknowledge the plurality of society. I think that relates a little bit to what Dr. Sergio Gatti has said in his previous presentation. We have to bring plurality in the decision-making process. There are plenty of other stakeholders we have beyond businesses that have a voice. They are impacted by this transition and their insights are critical to deliver a fair, but also an actually sustainable circular economy, which is not the thing that we are delivering right now or a mainstream policymaker is delivering right now. We need to think beyond the soft tools and market mechanisms. We need transformative measures, actual transformation. And that means to start reconsidering economic planning if necessary. If we do believe and we want to stay true to, for instance, the last report from the IPCC and how the predictions on climate change are going on, we need to have a radical change and we need to have it soon. Either we will overcome the 1.5 degrees in global warming, but it's not just global warming, it's about microplastics, it's about pollution of many, many ways. All boundaries or environmental boundaries are being overpassed, and we need to correct that and fast if we want to have a plan for the future. So, third thing to consider, we need to acknowledge the impossibility of infinite growth. Infinite growth is not just incompatible with a circular economy, it's incompatible with the planet in which we live. And we need one first step to start leaving GDP behind is to think about more realistic indicators that are not GDP. We need to find a way to create prosperity and livability beyond growth. And this is the big taboo that we need to start tackling. We don't need growth to have livability. We don't need growth to have prosperity if we can't redefine what prosperity is and how to deliver this prosperity to society. But we need to rethink that and immediately. So this is the big point and the big message that we want to give. So this is it. I mean, if you have further questions or you're interested in actually read the deliverables, of course they're available. And
yeah, thank you, Giuseppe. And of course, this work has resulted from the individual work that each of the ESRs has performed in Work Package 3, and there was a lot of work that you also did personally in understanding the rationale by means of which some of the European directives are designed, European directives on circular economy, and highlighting the tensions in the objectives that these sort of directives are meant to pursue. On the one hand, better usage of resources, reduction in energy usage, but at the same time, still looking to promote quantitative economic growth. So in a way institutionalizing the so-called rebound effect, which seems to be one of the problems when we go for circular economy practices in terms of lack of displacement of primary resources and lack of reduction in primary inputs. So, I mean, of course, there have been papers, deliverables produced on this matter. So everyone who is interested in this can look at the links that were supplied in the policy brief. I don't know if our panel members want to share something on this. I start from Patrick on this, who has been also publishing actively on the matter. Patrick, what is your view on this, the compatibility of growth and circular economy, the role of indicators in shaping the debate? We have also produced another deliverable which looks at potential alternative indicators for measuring the transition towards the circular economy, which was also converted into a paper. We will share it with all of you. Patrick, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, yes, this is a great and an important topic, and I've been trying to think this through myself together with others. We've initially also published some thoughts on this, but it's and we're still working on this as well with a new publication that we're preparing is exactly on this point, how to move beyond GDP as the indicator to measure economic performance, because there's obviously, I mean, it's not a new debate, it's a problematic indicator that doesn't capture, I mean, that even captures a lot of, it doesn't capture many things that contribute to the economy, unpaid work, care economy, etc. But it also captures economic activities that have very negative environmental impacts, but then show up as a positive kind of GDP. So that's really important to move beyond. And what we're proposing is something like a dashboard approach, where you also then have indicators for societal well-being, but also to capture natural capital and ecosystem health, etc. The question then, and there are many indicator systems already out there that have been used, including by the UN, and countries are looking at different types of environmental accounts. But how do we get policymakers to look at these indicators at the same level? So for politicians, still GDP is the main thing. So the really difficult part is how to get the messaging right to the policy community, especially when it comes to circular economy. If we say circular economy is incompatible with economic growth, politically that's very, I mean, it's a dead message. Then we won't get any more traction for circular solutions, unfortunately. Although we know that 100% circularity is not possible, one of the why policymakers are attractive to circular economy because it promises some degree of decoupling. The economic, so economic growth does not necessarily, is not problematic as such. Problematic is the throughput of primary resources, which are sourced from ecosystems, etc., etc. So there's the potential of dematerialization, decoupling that we haven't really yet fully materialized or dematerialized, so to speak. So that narrative has still traction with policymakers, including on the EU level. What were the other aspects? I think the other aspect that I've found out as well when it relates to degrowth and post-growth, and again in messaging, is the issue around the social inequality and justice. So one of the issues I found with degrowth, narratives, it's often framed in a kind of like neo-Marxist terminology. So this is not necessarily the argument for greater equity is obviously important, but if we phrase it in neo-Marxist terms, that automatically puts off policymakers, but also business community, etc. So I myself, I've tried to talk about global justice in different terms, because yeah, otherwise it's very much about how to communicate it and gain traction in the policy sphere. And so, sorry, yeah, that was quite long-winded. Happy to engage further on this because it's important and but also very complicated.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Do I reply or?
Yeah, if you want, let's listen to
yeah.
Luca.
Yes, sure. So maybe I agree almost completely with Patrick. Maybe one thing I've seen in the slide, which is also relates to what you mentioned before on the global approach, these eco-efficient technologies and circular technologies that we should implement. I think that research plays a very important role in making them cheap, so that they can also be applied at a global level. It's not going to solve the solution today, because if today we change value chains, the issue was mentioning will be there, but it's probably a solution to the globalization, to this national approach and to circular economy and the risks at global level. Maybe what I do not completely agree on is that circular economy indicators should be considered as growth or prosperity indicators. I think that we are a bit overcomplicating the matter here. What I mean is, of course, growth and prosperity can be seen as objectives. Circular economy should be seen as a method. And therefore, the indicators are a different thing. If you change your indicators with which you measure growth or prosperity, you also have to reevaluate what you intend with it's impossible to link economic growth or prosperity with its limits, because you're changing what you're measuring. Finally, I do think that indeed it's quite risky, especially to speak about the circular economy in these terms, because of its plurality. It's something you have mentioned, it's something plural. We have this momentum, this political will, because of the not being linked with the growth or pro-growth arguments. We now can expect quite right-winged European Parliament after the new elections in 2024. And it's quite risky to go to a new European Parliament and tell them, we need circular economy because we have to stop to grow. So, of course, I do agree completely that we should change how we measure prosperity and growth. We should take over societal and over sustainability dimensions into account beyond GDP. And I also invite you to join. I'm not sure if I will be there, but on the 15th of May, the European Parliament, 20 European members of the European Parliament are organizing an event beyond GDP, and it's going to be something quite big. So probably this will be more, and circular economy will be part of it, but probably will not be the main topic. The main topic will be which objective are we going into that economic dimension.
Thank you very much, Luca, for mentioning this. And I think you touched upon, very important point in the sense, even within the consortium, we have a very pluralistic view on circular economy. There are some people who say, oh, we should ditch circular economy idea, which is rubbish, has been hijacked by big corporations. And I think there is some merit on this. However, my position, and I even wrote that in an article which I wrote together with my co-author Mario Panzera, is that if an idea is able to produce such a positive mobilization in all sectors of the society, probably it's not a good idea to ditch it and to give it to somebody else. So we should continue to fight counter-hegemonic battle in that battleground. So thank you very much for raising this point. Emanuele, something else, and then Giuseppe for a quick reply.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea, and thanks, Joseph, again for a very interesting presentation. Just a couple of points. I mean, I think this is a very, again, vital topic, which has been evolving this space quite a lot in the last year. So there are some encouraging signs, I think, in opening up the conversation, to which there are many dimensions, right? One is, of course, on the narrative. So it's this almost a battle of narratives, right, between green growth and degrowth and much more. And of course, the risk here is, I think, it's exactly falling in this dichotomy, which then puts people a bit in a box, and is not really conducive to having an open dialogue based on more on objective goals and data as well. That's on one side. And of course, it's also the component of imaginaries, right? So really being able to come up with different alternatives that might replace a GDP-based economy. And that's also the work that you, Andrea, and Mario have been working on. Also, Martin Callisto has been working quite a lot in terms of thinking about what the future might look like and what different circular economies might look like. So this whole scenario and pathways work, which is, of course, very relevant. But I would also like to stress another component, which I think it's really important, and I would like to know also whether you have been focusing on that a bit more, which is the macroeconomic component, right? I mean, I think coming from an economics background myself, macroeconomics, it's also in its mainstream, especially in its mainstream component, quite a limited tool that we have. So it's a bit of a simplistic picture of the economy, with not a full understanding of actually all the mechanisms underlying all the macroeconomic aspects. And the same a little bit I found also in the circular economy space. And that's, I think, a key component for then arguing against or going beyond, let's say, a GDP-based economy. One example is this whole discussion about shifting taxes from taxing labor to taxing resource consumption, which would be a key enabler of the circular economy and would have many benefits from an economic and social point of view. But of course, in countries where 60% of the tax revenues is represented by labor taxes, for a politician who wants to change that, will understand quite clearly that it's a bit of a complex task to do, right? So politicians, of course, find themselves with a machine that has been working so far, this linear economy based on GDP, has been working with all the problems that we know, right? Environmental, social, economic as well. So it's not a perfect machine. Nobody's saying that. But on the other end, from the point of view of policymakers, it's a machine that more or less has been working. And without, I think, the tools from a macroeconomic perspective, able to provide answers to the questions they're looking for, which is, for instance, tax revenues, it's about economic competitiveness, it's about all of these discussions, it's going to be hard to convince them to make this shift and think in another way. So maybe, yeah, this framing it as a question to Joseph as well, whether you've been looking at the macroeconomic component and what might be required to really, beyond, let's say, the narrative, right, beyond the discourse, beyond the imagination as well, but looking into the a new macroeconomic model able to make us go beyond this GDP-centered economy.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emanuele. This is a very important comment. And actually, in another project, which is a sister project for ReTraCE, which probably you are familiar with, it's called Just to See. More or less, everybody from the ReTraCE consortium is involved, and it is coordinated by my colleague Mario Pansera. We are also developing some macroeconomic models for assessing the transition towards circular economy at the macro level, the impact of different measures such as taxations, subsidies, boosts to recycling and remanufacturing activities. And we should be able to share some results about these in a year's time, because now we are halfway through the project. I agree with you. You know, it's a key component, and disconnect between the circular economy literature and practice and the economics literature so far has been immense, and it has been causing a lot of issues. Giuseppe, you wanted to say something. I also note the very nice comment in the chat from Martin. Please, Giuseppe, for a quick reply and
quick overview. Okay, so first of all, to Patrick, first question, how we get the message to the policy community? And I think we are underestimating up to what extent even the most conservative parts of the European Parliament are able to see through how the size of the problem is. On 2021, when we were doing the deliverable on the indicators, one of the things that we put on the report is that on the Lisbon meeting of the Council, which is the most conservative of the three institutions of the trilogue of the European Union, where the member states themselves acknowledging that growth was a thing that could not go forever, and the European Commission themselves were developing a project called Beyond Growth since 2009, and they were developing their own indicator on progress and how to measure progress within the union. So slowly they are aware that they cannot maintain growth. Not only they cannot maintain it, but it's if they maintain it, they burn down the planet. And if you want to have an European Union, you need a planet to put it in. So they are aware. And the message gets there, but it's important for us, from the science sphere, to be crystal clear and to be insistent on this. Before you say, sorry, I have to really reply that the problem is not growth per se, it's the overuse of resources. But I mean, that's a little bit like saying, oh, there's a whole mountain that is burning down, but the problem is not the fire. The problem is that everything gets burned down. Yes, it gets burned down because there's a fire. And there's an overuse of resource because we aim for growth and we transform growth into an objective. The two things are connected and we need to understand this connection. This is why we need to drop growth per se. Last thing, how to bring this message to the business community, and I think that replies to the question, comment that everybody has done. There's a significant part of the business community that looks for benefits and looks to make money, to grow, to get more revenues, and it's difficult to conversate with that and to convince that. But this is why our second point we talk, and also many of us, we have insisted on the idea to bring new stakeholders in the picture, because we cannot design our planet or institutions and make our decisions just for the sake for businesses being business time and growing as businesses and getting more and more revenue. That cannot, if we run the planet like that, we will have a planet for 20 years. And we have to be crystal clear with that, because I think that relates to something that you said, Luca. So it's risky to ask businesses and big policymakers that we have to stop growing, but we have to make it very clear that talking about infinite growth is like talking about a flat Earth. Sure, you can talk about it, but it's just false. It's wrong. You cannot keep economic and infinite economic growth in a planet that has limits. We live in the planet that we have. You may accept it, you may not, but things are the way they are, regardless of the narrative that you may reproduce. It's like that. And we have to bring this fact to the policy table and use our position as academia to do that and to make it clear. Do you want to burn the planet, European Parliament? Do you want to burn the planet? Go ahead. You'll have planet for 20 years. But those are the facts. So how do we change the reality? Because that's what you said before. Well, yeah, okay, we have to overcome growth. So we need new stakeholders and we need new people, different people with different interests that are beyond of increasing financial revenue to make new decisions. If we don't have the power to empower different interests, like, having a planet, we are not going to make new decisions. So this is it. And yeah, look at the one last thing. When we talk about the circular economy is a method, but indicators are another thing. The problem is that indicators become a policy objective. If you look at the circular economy action plans, all of them, they put GDP growth as an objective. We transform these indicators that help to see how the economy is going. It became fetishized into an objective. And this is also a problem. And this is also why indicators can become a very strategic tool for that. We are not saying against growth. Maybe it can be strategic to talk about post-growth. Maybe it can be strategic to use different words as prosperity instead. But being honest, we have to drop growth, or we have to drop the planet. It's a this or the other. There's no middle point here.
Thank you, Giuseppe, for your passionate reply. I must say, that even if we like growth, we need to acknowledge at least that this growth proposition for the last 20 years has been quite problematic. Despite all the effort, the growth rates, at least in Europe, in the global north, have been negligible. So it means that there is some problem, and that probably, it would be better to reconsider other objectives, and assuming that this measure GDP is not telling us much in terms of the real objectives of society. Plus, as Patrick was also saying, you measure things that really should be measured in a negative way. You give value to things that should be valued negatively, and you don't measure things like care, labor, or the unpaid work that should have a positive impact on the quality of our society. Thank you very much, Josep. Excellent debate, and I think we have time for our last brief. So I will call Sania to join us for a brief from Work Package 4. Jay, you wanted to say something? If it is...
Yeah, it was just for Josep. Thanks for energizing the whole room. What do you think is more easy? Is it easier to, from your perspective, is it easier to just replace the word, or is it easier to start the debate and try to redefine it? Like, for example, it's easier to do with circular economy as a challenging its definition because it's being done every day. But growth is a very solid word, very strong foundations. What, in your opinion, is that?
If you ask what's easier, the easiest thing is to replace the word. But there's a problem. This word growth didn't appear out of spontaneous generation. It appeared because there are interests behind. If you replace the word and we bring a new word in, if the interests behind growth remain there, chances are that the new thing that we bring on the table will reproduce the same mistakes and growth. So we need a stronger and deeper transformation, radical transformation.
But the interests are...
sorry guys, we are just short on time, and we can discuss about this over lunch. Let's go with the policy brief from Work Package 4, which is probably the work package which has engaged from the very beginning and in the most consistent way with policy issues. So Sania, in her work, had a look at how regional development policies in the European Union are receiving European directives, and whether there is any tension between different policy objectives which are being established at the European level, also looking at the interaction of different priorities that regions have. So over to you, Sania.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning from my side too. So in Work Package 4, we were basically focusing on the regional development policies and the implications that they have for the whole transition towards the circular economy. But basically, our motivation strives from the necessary transformative system-wide change that is implied and necessary in order to have a implementation of circular economy actions and activities and policies, which include several preconditions. Obviously, first of all, the silo mentality of working needs to be avoided and breached. And this definitely means working across different governmental levels, territorial scales, policy areas, sectoral boundaries, and also implementing and using multi-level governance mechanisms both vertically and horizontally. Equally important, of course, is the stakeholders, so broad and profound mobilization, involvement, and alignment of different stakeholders in order to avoid this monopolistic situation where key stakeholders and key players are guiding the whole transition for their benefit. So we are considering this broad and profound mobilization of stakeholders coming from the quadruple helix model. And I think this is a point that was constant and mentioned in all our packages. Of course, the local factors play a huge role in the formulation of the circular economy strategies, considering that each territory will transition in a territorially differentiated manner. And last but not least, the smart specialization strategies, considering that it's one of the most relevant EU policies on the regional levels, are playing a huge role towards the regional development, the cohesion, but also the green transition overall in the current programming period 2021-2027. Up until now, obviously, they were focusing on the regional strengths and competitive advantage, but what we are trying to also voice is that the need to somewhere put the element of opportunities, so not to focus only on the competitive advantage, because the competitive advantage that exists within the region might not be, let's say, might not be in line with the circular economy transition. Therefore, we have to think about the possible opportunities in the future. Some of our recommendations were obviously the necessity of a place-based approach, as I already mentioned, considering that each region will have its own story and its own it will transition in a really territorially differentiated manner. The formulation of city policies will need to be defined or formulated as a living strategy, which was also the case with the Brussels Circular Economy Program from 2016, which was defined or formulated as a living strategy with frequently with a revision mechanism on a certain frequency in order to capture all the changes that are happening meanwhile. Again, we have here the circular economy, the S3 strategy as being the most holistic instrument for the regional circular economy implementation. Institutional environment, definitely it's really important because regions might devise really ambitious strategies and put targets and objectives and goals or territories overall, but what matters is the implementation, and the implementation of all these policies really depends on the institutional capacity, the effectiveness and functionality of the institutional structures which exist within the local and regional administrations. And it's really hard to be capacities, capabilities, and this kind of issues are really hard to be injected from outside. It's something that needs to be developed within the institution overall, and obviously it takes time. A balanced approach for implementation is certainly preferred, having the top-down directionality, but also not disregarding the bottom-up initiatives. And this is certainly enabled by the functional and effective multi-level governance mechanisms. Here we have also the participation in different cross-disciplinary projects. And the creation of so-called circular hubs, or you might find them either under different names, like the stakeholder platforms, which is basically a place, mostly virtual, oftentimes where different stakeholders from government, academia, industry, but also society are coming together to exchange knowledge, because we obviously don't need to start everything from scratch. So knowledge exchange is quite important. And last but not least, these links between S3 strategies and circular economy appear to be less deterministic, because we must consider the risk of problematic regional trajectories, such as regional lock-ins or negative path dependency issues, because we are seeing that regions, some of the regions, not all of them, have not been taking the S3 strategies as an opportunity for strategic change and transformative action, but rather as an administrative procedure or a box-ticking exercise for just obtaining further EU funds. So that's in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sania, and very relevant, and again, full of implications. Of course, this is an extremely condensed version of the monumental work that Sania has performed in the last 4 years, which will soon culminate in her PhD thesis, which of course, is highlighting how things that sometimes are presented as sort of very mechanistic link, go for an S3 strategy, couple that with a circular economy strategy, and things will happen. Well, this is far from deterministic. This can cause lock-ins. And in one of your publications, you were also mentioning, this risk of a two-speed Europe when it comes to circular economy, which also links to what Luca was saying earlier in terms of this champions logic, the regions which are already on the trajectory to become very circular, becoming more and more circular, and the peripheral regions of Europe being, I would say, much behind and continuing to lag behind, not being able to attract funding, and essentially having done a divide which becomes bigger and bigger. So solution also of circular hubs, regional hubs, which can also play a participatory planning role, is something we definitely need to elaborate. Comments, Luca, given your engagement in a regional agency which plays very similar role to what Sanya was suggesting, what's your perspective?
Yes, two things. One very short comment on the S3 platform, which I think gained much more attention now that letter of support from the people appointed to be there on the platform are required in order for regions to participate in the I3 program, International Investment Instruments. From practice, I am really seeing that there are regions in the northern countries where the economy is stronger, where people don't even know that we are appointed to be to S3, and there are regions in southern countries that are not updating it and it's still there. Like, so I do understand why we are focusing so much on the S3 platform because of all the European interest on that. But from the other side, is it something bottom up, or are we still doing something top down, speaking about bottom up approaches? On the circular apps, because I'm program manager for circular apps at Holland Circular Hotspot. My goal will be by the end of this year to have at least one contact for each national, because we also consider them national, but also one contact for each, not one region level to install and set up circular apps where there are not. I do not consider them mainly to be virtual. I do consider them to be physical places. Two good examples could be, for example, Circular Friesland and Circular Flandern. I think that their role would be more of a knowledge exchange, because they should be really houses for collaboration among the stakeholders. We were speaking before about this proactive need from society, from the stakeholders. They are, we cannot pretend that people that are not educated or that the society as a whole will become proactive from one day to the other. You need this kind of public-private platforms, because I do consider their business model to be public-private, to boost collaboration, of course, through knowledge exchange. But we also need them to make the link between the quadrupletics, therefore also with the policies. You need them to make education and information activities, like events that make, from one side, share information, from the other side, make matchmaking businesses at regional level. And you also need them to give support to the small and medium enterprises of the place, or to incubate startups. I think this is a crucial point, because right now we see in Europe, and also on the smart city specialization platform, that you have digital innovation apps. You have the digital innovation apps at regional level. You have the EEN, the Enterprise Europe Network, that makes the matchmaking between businesses, and that it's now starting since a couple of years to have some advisor for circular economy, but you don't have any major pillar on the transition towards circularity and transition toward sustainability. So you don't have the circular economy apps, you only have the digital innovation apps if you look at a top-down level. If you look at a bottom-up level, there are countries that are starting to make these physical circular apps. And this is probably needed also because circular economy and climate have legal parameters that are coming and that are already existing, but more are coming, and there is no one to support there, while digitalization, of course, brings to a lot of growth, but it's not legally mandatory from countries. So
thank you very much, Luca, also for mentioning, the predictability model, because Sanya is also using that framework, and she has also published a paper where she has proposed an adaptation of that model for the promotion of circular economy in regional settings. Maybe you can share it with Luca. I don't know if you came in contact already as part of your interviews, but maybe
Not yet.
over lunch we can have a chat. Okay. And Emanuele, any further points you want to add?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. And at the risk of sounding repetitive, I mean, congratulations to Sunny as well for another excellent and vital work, which again, I think brings us closer to a conceptualization of the circular economy and operationalization as well of the concept, which is more grounded in reality and is not just out of ideological and reasons and principles based, let's say. So this place-based approach, I think, cannot be stressed enough as an important component of the implementation of circular economy in different places of the world. And there are many implications, because this, of course, concerns both the needs for a circular economy in a specific place, the opportunities, and also the solutions that would work in that regard. So I think that's also an important caveat that we usually don't see that much around, which is whenever something is presented as a solution to a circular economy, so a circular solution, it's important to stress where it is so and why, in which context does it work. And that's something that sometimes I think, I don't know whether the characters in a paper are over or on a web page, there is no space anymore, but it's a kind of, should be a sort of disclaimer, right? This solution has been working, but in these conditions, so that also others that might want to perhaps take it up and replicate it have more elements to understand where it would work and where it wouldn't. So that's one point which I think is really important. And another point as well is to use this place-based approach as a way of actually understanding what the circular economy might mean in different contexts, right? So using this place-based approach as a way of also exploring different conceptions of circular economy depending on different places. This is very clear when we go across continents, right? Europe and Africa clearly have different conceptions, perhaps at least in certain instances. But also in Europe, there is a huge diversity, and also not only between countries, but also within countries from urban and rural areas. So that's also another important space of living, another important point of leaving the space for this place-based approach to come up with new definitions and conceptions of circular economy. And the final point, I think, yeah, with these circular hubs and these circular economy champions and the ones lagging a bit behind, I think it's important that everybody finds the right balance between listening to the ones that have been already doing some great work in the area, so having the humbleness as well to listen and to appreciate efforts being done in other parts of the world, but also the right balance with actually some autonomy in deciding what is the path that you want to work on. So in really shaping your narrative and valuing, leveraging your unique benefits and value for then adding value in the circular economy. So that's, I think, an important component of finding the right balance, neither looking at someone as the perfect ones, because actually nobody's perfect, fortunately or unfortunately, especially in the circular economy in general. But also being really autonomous and independent in shaping your own path forward.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. Very useful again. And Patrick for final comment.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Just to add, maybe just some thoughts. No, I agree with all of what was said before. And yeah, the focus on place-based approaches, yeah, it's very important. Just two things. I think, like, from the UK context, where we don't see the government or taking a very proactive role on circular economy, we see a lot of, I mean, the importance of more regional approaches is becoming clear. So if there's lack from the central or top level of government, so we see very much a lot of activity, for example, in Wales on the circular economy, which is great, as well as many initiatives in cities around, also citizen initiatives, repair cafes, or even like here in Brighton, where I live, as a Brighton circular hove, bring together stakeholders from business community, but also NGOs, local councils. So from that perspective, it's really important to have these bottom-up initiatives and solutions. In terms of, Emanuele mentioned Africa. Actually, I remembered that during the last World Circular Economy Forum, which was in December in Kigali, there was also strong representation from the Netherlands, including the Holland Circular Hotspot, which organized an event on the sidelines in parallel, exactly on this topic of circular hubs, how to create more circular hubs across Africa. And it's built on also the African Circular Economy Network. Again, very much a bottom-up process that's emerged over the last few years. And there's quite some momentum. So I think there's really important developments that are taking place. And really, we should encourage also this experience sharing between European circular hubs with other regions around the world. So not just government to government, business to business, but also these civil society initiatives around also stakeholder platforms. I think that's really, really important.
Thank you, Patrick. And I think Luca wants
Yes, just a quick answer on that, because indeed, in the next World Circular Economy Forum 2023, we are organizing 2 sessions following up on what happened in Kigali. One will be following up on Africa, and so also the need for circular hubs in Africa, and one will be on every continent outside Africa, including Europe. So I'm organizing that session, and we can follow up on that. For one thing I forgot to mention, because indeed what we see as on the place-based transition and the link with the circular hubs is that the main player, the hub, should not be fully public or fully private, but this also leads to the need for a new professional figure. We call the person that is inside the hub, that is driving the hub, the transition broker. We can, I mean, these are wordings, but again, the quadruple helix approach that has been studied, and I'm also curious about your work. Basically, when you see why it's so famous, is because it's in every topic of the European Commission, you have to include it. And therefore, it started basically as a keyword to get funding. But who is actually really doing that? Like, who is proactively focused on the quadruple helix? Who is the guy? Who is the person? What is the figure inside the quadruple helix, if you have to put a center to it? And so probably in the European Year of Skills, there is space to also for having a look at what you will discuss later. There is space to further analyze.
Yeah, no, I think this is a crucial point, Luca. And yeah, I mean, the work that Sanya started, proposing these sort of regional constellations of stakeholders, which put together this sort of circular economy forums. It's fine, but leads exactly to these questions, then who is managing these, and, is there a sort of participatory structure where all the members elect this transition broker? What powers does this person has? Is he a Warasian auctioneer? Is it more a central planner? Is it a facilitator? So these are all questions that we should start asking ourselves, precisely to do what Emanuele was suggesting, grounding the circular economy a little bit more in reality, and explaining how it should work in practice. Okay, we have firms which might be collaborating if we allow them to exchange knowledge, if they know more about each other processes, if we do a little bit of demand and supply matching, how do we make sure this happens? So we look forward to further conversations with you all on this. Okay, thank you very much, Sanya. So this was our final policy brief. I think we are pretty much on time, so just 5 minutes late. I know that some of our panel members need to go. Maybe Patrick was so kind to be here with us today, even if he has quite a packed schedule for the day. So I just want to thank everybody for this extremely fruitful discussion. It has been really enjoyable. We have gathered a lot of feedback that will help us producing the next iteration of briefs. And really we are grateful for the time we have shared with us today and for the expertise you have shared with us. This has been really a positive experience for us as a consortium, for the ESRs, and will further help us towards the production of one of the final deliverables of the project, which is the set of the policy briefs. We are now having a lunch break, so for those who are attending the event online, you can even stay connected. We will restart our sessions at 1, mainly focusing upon our follow-up plans. So you are more than welcome to join us for the discussion on the follow-up plans. You know, we can even forge new collaborations, even if you are not formally part of the ReTraCE consortium.